Welcome back. Time is 5:48. It's time to talk about your money right here on Good Morning Quad Cities. But first, let's take a look at how the stock market is doing. At the end of last week's trading, the S&P 500 was down 2.1%, NASDAQ down 2.6%, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average down 0.8%. Joining us is our financial expert, Mark Grywacheski from the Quad Cities Investment Group. Mark, thanks so much for being back with us today on this blustery, slightly snowy morning.
Hey, good morning to you, Linda. Good to see you again. And
you too.
First, everybody just grab a big, giant swig from your morning bucket of coffee as we kind of dissect all of this inflation data. But remember that inflation isn't inherently a bad thing. Inflation, i.e. rising prices, simply represents a strong consumer demand for goods and services that ultimately drives our economy forward. But the key word for inflation, though, is moderation. Historically, the Federal Reserve has deemed an inflation rate of 2% to be that ideal rate of inflation. But obviously, over the past 13 months, inflation has soared well above that 2% target rate. Inflation in May was reported at 8.5%, a new 40-year high. Well, here we go. As we said, inflation just reported at 8.5. A new 40-year high. And that's what this inflation is really becoming, Linda, a near generational type of inflation that we haven't seen since the late 1970s, early 1980s, when many of our viewers weren't even born yet.
So you don't seem overly concerned. Is it just kind of a wave we have to ride? For now.
For now, the Federal Reserve is expecting inflation to kind of taper off a little bit throughout the course of the year, but inflation will be at a historically elevated level for quite some time.
I think people want to know, how is the situation in Ukraine, the ongoing war, impacting inflation here at home for us?
Great question. This war in Ukraine has forced global sanctions against Russia, but it's also further destabilized much of Eastern Europe's supply chains of raw materials. And even before Russia invaded Ukraine, if we can go back one more here, or maybe not. Here we go. Even before Russia invaded Ukraine back on February 24th, Wall Street was expecting inflation here in February to jump from 7.5% up to 7.6, maybe 7.7%. So February's inflation rate of 7.9% only received this slight boost from Russia's invasion. Now, obviously, in March here, inflation was a little bit more impacted, but just kind of taking a step back and looking at this severe inflationary landscape, we were seeing this well before Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
I gave you a sneak peek of the graphic that's next, but this is affecting prices in everyday goods and services that folks are facing.
Well,
talk about that.
That's the big challenge with this current inflationary landscape, Linda. Very few goods are being shielded from these rising prices, especially commodities. Just take a look at this graph here. You can hardly consider any of these items to be, high-end luxury goods. But over the last 12 months, price of meat has risen over 14%, eggs 11%, fruit 10%, clothing almost 7%. Everybody knows this, gallon of gasoline, almost 49%. But Linda, natural gas, which is used to heat roughly about 50% of all U.S. homes across the nation, up over 21%. Used cars and trucks, not new, used cars and trucks, 35%. And this rising inflation is costing the average American household about $5,200 a year in higher costs. And for many people who are low income, even middle class, and especially retirees on some type of fixed income, it's forcing those people to make that very, very difficult decision of what they can buy versus what they can no longer afford.
Oh yeah, and you think about the used cars that you pointed out specifically. People assume that if they get a used car, they're going to get a deal, but not right now.
Not right now, that's for sure.
Okay, Mark, thanks so much for being here. We always appreciate your expertise.
Great to be here. See you next week.
Absolutely.